Apparitions, bugs, aliens. Yo, what's up? It's someone that's no one, and welcome back to today's report. Today's report is sent in by Normandie, where they took 1,000 milligrams or 1 gram of diphenhydramine. And here's the full report details. Alright guys, here we have another high dose DPH report. This one marking the 1 gram dosage. Which, man, I really don't like to see this again and again as time goes on. But some people end up in really bad spots in life due to many different reasons, and the concern for your health and safety can easily go out the window. But this trip ends up being really vivid, with some trippy unnerving descriptions to go with it. There's a lot of dark themes here, and it's really bizarre to even think that this could all happen with some allergy medication. But this is DPH. And here's another classic tale describing what the experience is like. So I'm sure you'll enjoy this. Without further ado, let's dive right into this. I was living in my old 1980 Allegro RV at a campground, and had been on a 3-week binge of taking DXM, sometimes with LSD. And it's pretty safe to say that my brain was pretty well fried at the time of this experience. At 4 p.m., I took 1,000 milligrams of Equate brand diphenhydramine pills and sat on my couch waiting for it to kick in. The transition into the trip was seamless. By the time I was in full-on delirium, I could not even recall that I had taken a drug. The first 2 hours of the trip were spent in my RV, sitting on the couch and occasionally walking from one end to the other end of this small space. I would look around and notice someone sitting at the other end of my RV. The first time there was someone I knew sitting in the driver's seat, facing away from me. I was confused why they were there. I called out to them with no reply. As I continued to get their attention, I got more and more freaked out, and eventually got up and started taking steps closer to them while talking. Once I got to where they were, I went to put my hand on their shoulder, and they disappeared like a vapor. At this point, I had a flash of realizing that I took a drug, but this awareness vanished after about 30 seconds. I went back to the couch and sat down for a few minutes until I looked up and saw another person I knew standing in the hallway of the RV. They were talking to me. I was talking back to them, and I have no memory of what was being said. I would see these people, and sometimes they would disappear in the middle of talking, and sometimes I would walk up to them and then they would disappear, or they would suddenly turn into an object that I had been mistaking as a person. Each vanishing was followed by a brief awareness of having taken a drug, just to quickly forget, and the next apparition of a person would be completely real to me. Eventually, I wanted to leave the campground, perhaps to get away from this repeating horror. I got in my truck and drove it to the gate. I have no idea how I was able to operate a vehicle in the state I was in. The gate of this campground was locked, and each resident had a key. There were 2 gates right beside each other, but only the right gate was ever used. Unbeknownst to me, they had switched the gates on that day, and we had to go out the left gate now while the other one was being repaired. When I rode up to the gate, I had a hallucination of a guy I went to school with running out to the gate and attaching something to it, then running away. I got out of my truck and walked up to the gate. There was a piece of paper attached to the gate that said, "Please use other gate." But I did not read this at all, and instead saw a goodie bag. I thought the guy knew I was coming, ran to the gate to leave me a gift, and then left, as if mischievously. Well, I wanted that goodie bag, so I went back to my truck and got my knife, and then cut the goodie bag off the gate. While I was cutting it, I heard someone yelling in the distance, but assumed they must not be talking to me. I took the goodie bag back to my truck, then pulled the truck out to the gate to try to unlock it. I stood there trying to unlock it with my key for around 5 minutes when the campground security guy rode up in a golf cart. He yelled again, "Do you know what was on that sign?" I just stuttered, No. He could tell I was pretty messed up on something, and just gave me a look of disgust and pity and drove off. I went back to my truck, read the sign, and realized what it said, and unlocked the other gate to get out. Again, I have no idea how I was able to drive, but next, I remember being at a pizza place I had recently quit my job at, which was about 10 minutes down the road. I did not turn in my 2 weeks, but instead just stopped showing up and blocked their numbers. I walked in the door, walked behind the counter. I have a little bit of memory of them looking at me bewildered. Someone asked what I was doing. I walked through the kitchen and back to the front several times. Finally, I walked to the back door, then walked around the building back to my truck and left. I don't remember hardly any of the driving, but the next memory I have was driving somewhere it would have taken me 30 minutes to get to. So apparently I drove a lot and obeyed traffic laws well enough to not get in a wreck or pulled over, despite tripping extremely hard on a deliriant. I remember being on this road at sunset and driving with the windows down. Looking out the window, I saw these huge robotic squid-like creatures with arms like Dr. Octopus from Spider-Man, and their heads were big cylindrical cameras. They were sort of swimming through the air as if it was water, and there were maybe a dozen of them. They were flying around and investigating the landscape as if they were invading and surveying the place. I remember seeing these creatures was one of the most strikingly real parts of the trip. And again, I had no idea I was on a drug. I genuinely could not believe what I was seeing. It was completely surreal in an indescribable way. I looked back to the road and noticed in my rearview mirror that there was a huge spaceship behind me, like a gigantic metal flying saucer, and it was right on my tail, trailing me down the road. I was so terrified by this, and it felt like I was in danger, gripping the wheel and trying to keep calm, and continue driving straight. We went down the road like this for a minute or two until suddenly I was back in my RV on the couch. The rest of the trip was me sitting there, being amazed and revolted by the thousands of insects on the floor. Tons of horsehair worms, centipedes, redworms, spiders, etc. Most of them were tiny, but there were some that were a foot long or longer. Particularly huge worms and centipedes. Every little texture thing in the camper, including the walls, appeared to be covered in a mix of insects and worms. Some of them seemed to die when I tried to crush them. I remember standing on my couch, trying to sweep at the floor with a broom. I was also playing with my mustache, and when a hair would come out, it would be a worm or centipede in my hand, and I couldn't kill it no matter how hard I squeezed. At no point during this did I have any idea that any of this was not real. The only flashes of lucidity during this whole thing was at the beginning when the apparitions would disappear. Eventually, I fell asleep. In the morning, it took me a while to wake up and remember what had all happened. The hardest thing to believe was that I got out and drove. And I believed for a while that I really didn't, but instead that the whole episode was purely a hallucination. At least, I hoped that I hadn't really gone out. I was horrified that I put myself in that much danger on the road, and was scared about the possible consequences of my interaction with the security guy at the gate. After a while, I got up and went outside to my truck. In the back seat was a piece of paper that said, "Please use other gate."